Good morning, Aldersley. Welcome to today's assembly on Tuesday the 12th of May by Miss Butler. I hope you are all up and ready to go for your lessons today. So before we get going with today's assembly properly, I just wanted to take a minute to think back on the challenges that Mr. Richardson set for you yesterday. So he asked you to try and discover something new, and there were three parts to that you could have picked from. Now, the one that I went for was the top one, to go for a walk and take your time to look around you and see what's changed or something that you've never noticed before. So I went for a walk not far from me where they've recently finished building some new houses before the lockdown, and I've never had a chance to actually go and see them finished, and just to take a few minutes to think about how much better it is now for the area, that land is being used properly, and just see lots of families that have moved in and how it's now a brand new community. Mr. Richardson also asked you to think about the action calendar too, so meaningful May that we are now in, and to think about your most important values and to make sure that you have used them. Now, lots of you live those school values, don't you, every single day, to be challenged, to be prepared, to be respectful. And it was quite obvious that lots of you were continuing that, just as you always do at virtual school and just as you always do when we're in school as well. So well done to all of you that are keeping up with those lessons, being prepared, being on time, and being challenged by doing your work to the very best of your ability. With that in mind then, just a few shout outs to people in particular on Twitter who have really shown off how they have been living those school values. So, for example, Alison, well done to you. We know you're reading the Vampire Diaries and that you are taking part in the AHS reading streak. Now, for those of you who haven't seen that, it works a little bit like Snapchat. So if we can see that you have been reading for consecutive days, then you are going to build up more points. So if you're not involved with that, it's definitely something to get involved with. Make sure you speak to your English teacher about how you can do that. Hannah in Year 8, she's been taking part as well with her reading and she has reached millionaire status. So fantastic, Hannah, well done to you. There's also some amazing work going on in lots of subjects, but in particular Year 8 in geography, who have been doing their own indoor field work and then putting that data into charts. So that's absolutely outstanding work, so well done to all of you guys. And then finally, two subjects that are particularly close to my heart, being open subjects. The music work that's being produced, absolutely amazing. Well done to Libby and all of Year 7 music for that, and especially as well to Year 10 sport with the work that you have been submitting to Mr. Hickman. He's particularly impressed with you. So if you're not already, make sure you're on Twitter and that you're sending us updates of your work and maybe what you are doing for the daily challenges. The Twitter handle that you need is on the bottom right hand corner. Don't worry, we don't want to follow you. We just want you to tweet us with those messages. You may or may not be aware then that today, Tuesday the 12th of May, is International Nurses Day. And it is a day for us to reflect on the outstanding work that nurses all across the world do day in, day out, often, as we see at the moment, under particularly difficult situations, to care for those people who really need it. So we're going to think today in our assembly about what it means to be a nurse, but also about where nursing came from. So being a nurse, quite often we think of it as being somebody who cares for people who are unwell, and that is a big part of the job, but it's not the only part of it. Lots of nurses within their day-to-day job are also more involved in trying to help people from becoming ill in the first place. So for example, you might have seen the school nurse around before, particularly maybe if you were having your vaccinations, and her job there is to try and make sure that you are protected from getting a disease in the future. So there are lots of different types of nurses you might come across within your life. There are nurses who work within operating theatres in hospitals, nurses who work particularly with individuals who might have a learning disability or a mental health illness. There are nurses who work and specialise within general practice, so the nurse that you might see when you go to the doctor's surgery. But what makes a good nurse? Despite all those different routes that you could specialise in if you wanted to become a nurse, there are lots of different things that they also have in common. And those are those things that you can see there, being caring, kind, empathetic, non-judgmental, and so on. But one of the things that ties them all together is the idea that being a nurse is considered a vocation. And what we mean by that is that it's something that you feel that you might have a particular calling for, or you feel drawn to, or particularly interested in. Quite often you might hear your teachers say that they might have always known they wanted to teach. And quite often that's the same with people who go into medical professions too. But where did nursing actually come from? Well, there is a link to where nursing came from to the fact that today is International Nurses' Day. So the 12th of May was chosen on purpose because it is actually the 200th anniversary of Florence Nightingale being born. Now, I'm sure you'll have heard of her before. She is considered to be the founder of modern nursing. Her name also has been used for the temporary hospitals that were built to cope with the extra patients who needed support for coronavirus. She was born into an upper-class family who were quite rich, and she was highly educated. She was expected to marry into another good family and to have children, but not to have a career. But that's not what Florence wanted for herself. She believed that women could work too, not just men, and she had a particular calling to care for people. Nursing then, though, was very different. Medicine at the time was completely different too, because we didn't have the scientific knowledge that we have nowadays. So she initially worked as what we might consider as a nurse, although very different to what it is now, in London, after she visited different countries such as Germany to try and learn about how they would nurse patients. And she brought some of that knowledge back to her job in London. But that was only the start of what she achieved and what she became famous for. So where Florence Nightingale particularly started to make a difference was during the war in Crimea. In 1858, she travelled to Crimea, which you can see on the map there. So the one on the right-hand side where you can see those red shaded areas where there is that number 2 underneath Ukraine is where she travelled to. So a long way from home, in particular in those times. She went with 38 other volunteers who she trained in those skills and imparted that knowledge that she learnt from going to places like Germany to help nurse and care for the soldiers who were injured during that war. So it was during this time in the Crimea that Florence Nightingale began to develop some of the practices that we see our nurses continuing with today. That is why she is known as the founder of modern nursing. She is the person who changed that job forever. She first of all noticed that more soldiers were actually dying of infections that they were gaining more often than not in the hospital, rather than the injuries that they'd sustained in the war that ended them up in hospital with in the first place. So, for example, things like typhus, cholera and tetanus, diseases that we don't hear about nowadays, were rife during those times and would spread very easily between the soldiers in that hospital because of the lack of cleanliness. So she realised, before we even knew what viruses and bacteria were particularly, the importance of sanitation and cleanliness, the importance of washing our hands. We know that now, don't we? We know the importance of PPE for our doctors and for our nurses who are on the front line with the coronavirus. We know to protect ourselves, one of the things we need to do is to wash our hands. But in those days, it wasn't so well known, and it was Florence Nightingale who started to train her nurses to wash their hands, to change the bed sheets, to make sure that any waste was thrown away sensibly, to protect not only themselves, but each individual soldier that they were caring for. And if they practiced cleanliness and sanitation in between caring for each individual soldier, it far minimised the risk of an infection then spreading. She also recognised the need for good nutrition for those soldiers who were being cared for to have healthy meals. She realised that if they had that nutrition, it made them stronger. It helped them to heal. It helped to build up their immune system, make it a little bit stronger to hopefully prevent them from catching another illness or an infection. And because of what she learned, she was able to write home to the government and to raise awareness of those poor standards in the hospitals, not only in Crimea, but also back in England, and to make suggestions for change. So we can see how she was the founder of nursing and what we might consider to be those basic principles that all of our nurses, regardless of what specialism they have, will follow today. However, what Florence Nightingale is most famous for, and you might have heard of this before, is being the Lady of the Lamp. Now, because it is International Nurses Day, this evening at 8:30 p.m, we are being asked to shine a light from our windows to recognise the work of nurses all over the world. And with the current situation, we are more grateful for what they do than ever, aren't we? So that might be your iPhone light, it could be a bedside lamp if you can move one safely, or just your normal light in your room or one of the other rooms within your home. But why are we being asked to do that? Well, first of all, because it is the symbol of Florence Nightingale, and we're using that as a symbol to reflect on the excellent work that all nurses do. And it came from the fact that within the Crimea and those hospitals, when darkness would fall on the wards, Florence Nightingale would light her lamp so that she could see while she walked up and down the ward and checked on every individual soldier. She would check whether they needed anything, if they needed any particular care, and sometimes she would just sit with them and talk to them. Because as well as the sanitation issues that she was able to learn from and develop procedures for, she also recognised that to help somebody get well and to care for them properly, they needed someone to talk to, they needed emotional support. So that's something else that she has inspired nurses with today. And we also know now that our nurses work throughout the night, don't we? We have nurses in shifts within the hospitals because people don't just need care in the day, they also need it during the night, and that's something else that we learnt from her too. And when she returned home, later in her life, she set up a training school to pass on everything that she had learnt about being a nurse to a whole new generation. And that school now still exists, and it's part of King's College, which is a university in London. So she passed on everything that she learnt. She inspired another generation of nurses that followed her, and they in turn were then able to inspire the next generation, and so on. And that idea of one generation of nurses inspiring another generation is something that I really identify with within my own family. So there are 3 pictures here. The first lady on the left was my great-grandmother. She was a civilian nurse. In the middle is my grandma. She was a nurse within the army, in the Queen Alexandra's Royal Army Nursing Company. And then on the right-hand side is my mom, and she is still a part-time nurse today within the NHS. So tonight, at 8:30, we'll be shining a light to recognise the work of nurses. I'll be thinking of these 3 ladies here, but also in particular the nurses who've recently cared for my mum, who was in hospital very poorly with the virus, and she is now safe and well at home. I'll also be thinking as well of those nurses that are day to day facing the front line and helping to care for those individuals with coronavirus. But as well as that, those nurses who might not be directly on the front line, but are still working within our hospitals, perhaps within the maternity wards to help ladies who are having babies, or who are still working within GP practices to make sure that children are having their vaccines to protect them from other diseases that still exist. I'll also be thinking about those nurses who have more recently sadly lost their lives while helping to care for individuals, particularly one that we can see there, Arima Nazreen, who was from Warsaw, so very local to us all. So perhaps at 8:30 tonight then you can shine your light, whichever light it is that you choose, to recognise perhaps, like me, nurses that you have known or that you still know, nurses that you may have seen in the news, nurses that in the past have helped to care for you or for a loved one, and to think that there are many more of those people across the world who are working to try and care as best as they can for as many people as they can. And if nursing is something that interests you, then there are some links here for you to use to help you to see how you might work your way up to a career within nursing or other areas of a medical field. Please remember as well that Miss Barnes is available to speak to you about any career option that you might have. It doesn't just have to be nursing, it could be anything. So for today's challenges then, it's no surprise that my first one is that at 8:30 p.m. tonight, I would like you to get involved with the Shine a Light for Nurses campaign. So shine a light from your window to recognise the work of all nurses all over the world. Secondly, I want you to try and learn from Florence Nightingale, because one of the things that really sticks with me about her is that she was always looking to improve. She was always trying to look for new and better ways of doing things to try and help everybody. So I want you to try and find one thing that you can improve easily in your house today. I don't mean painting a wall or anything like that. It could be a small piece of housework. It could be to tidy a drawer or a cupboard that you know is in a bit of a mess, or even your whole room. Just to improve that standard of living for you and for everyone else, because sometimes when things are a bit tidier, everything else just feels a little bit calmer. It's something we can control. And finally, for Meaningful May from our calendar, it's the 12th of May today, we know that, and it says for today that we need to be grateful for the little things, even in difficult times. So being grateful for those things that we might not normally notice, or for something we take for granted, can actually really help to improve our mood. So I want you to try and think today of 3 different things that you normally take for granted, and just take a minute to appreciate whatever that might be. And if you want to let me know how you're getting on with any of these challenges, you can tweet me. You can see my Twitter handle there, and also the school one too. So make sure you let us know how you're getting on with those, and also with some of your schoolwork generally. Maybe you'll be seen in tomorrow's Assembly's shout-outs. So before we end today's Assembly, I just wanted to remind you of those really important email addresses. Should you need any support, if you need somebody to talk to, then get in touch with your head of year, Miss Bopari. We're online between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. So please do email somebody to let us know how we can help you. And remember, if it is outside of those hours between 8 and 4 p.m, all of the email addresses and phone numbers of where you can get support are always posted on each of your teams. So that's it for today's Assembly. I hope you have a fantastic day. Hope you enjoy your lessons, and I can't wait to see what you are getting up to today with your learning, and also can't wait to see what people tweet me with their challenges. So have an absolutely brilliant day.